see, when you travel around the Kenyan coast, you appreciate how critical and how important is this blue economy and the maritime sector to the Kenyan people, and as well as the Kenyan economy. And that's why the government is putting in so much effort to try and tap the resources that lies therein in a sustainable manner. You know, from fishing to shipbuilding, name it all. It has the potential to turn around the Kenyan economy with tremendous GDP growth. This week on Inside Government, we are on board MV Petra 2, a Kenyan-owned ship that plies the eastern seaboard of East Africa from the port of Djibouti to ports in Mozambique. And we want to discuss the current status of blue economy as well as maritime affairs. And joining us on the set is Nancy Karigithu. She's the PS in charge of shipping and maritime affairs. She's here with us. Let's get to hear from her. Thank you so very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
First of all, it's such a nice feeling when you're calling this the deck or the bridge.
This is a bridge.
This is a bridge
of a ship.
This is where the
navigation of the ship takes place.
Ah.
Yes, this is where the captain essentially does his work.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
This actually looks complicated, if you are to ask me.
Not to him.
But you see, the beauty about this is that you know, Kenya has the capacity to train people who can use these machines, right?
Absolutely. And that's why we are very lucky and very grateful that we have industries like this one. Because when we train people on the theoretical bit, in terms of maritime, in terms of the skills, then the IMO requires that they must have minimum period of hands-on experience. And unless we have partnership with institutions like this ones, on assets like this one, then we miss that opportunity. We are very lucky because our graduates from Banari Maritime Academy, the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology, have live scenarios where they can apply what they needed, and then they get certificates because under IMO regulations, you need a two-tiered training path. The theory, which you do in classroom, then you've got what they call competency-based training and certification. The academic papers are with you for life. Your degree, your diploma, that one nobody will ever take it from you. But the competency bit that comes because you've got knowledge of applied studies, what you learned, is periodical. So you have to keep renewing, revalidating that competency certificate, and it's what determines whether you are still relevant or you're not. So when students do the basics, they come on board Petra 2 or other vessels. They come on board if they are engineering, then they'll go to the shipbuilding bit of sector, we shall be seeing later. And that means that with that, then they go to Kenya Maritime Authority. They are given oral examinations. They are able to display that they understood what they learned in class and they can put it into application. Then they get a competency certificate, which is valid for either 5 years, 3 years, depending on the particular rule. And then after 5 years, they go back to class, learn a bit. The examiner is satisfied that they've kept abreast. Then they revalidate, or they go to the next level of competency requirements.
I know a lot of attention is being given to Banari Maritime Academy. I mean,
yes, absolutely.
And for an institution that has been there now for more than 40 years.
Yes.
How do we plan to empower Banari Maritime Academy to offer courses that are relevant to today's needs in the maritime industry?
The process has already started. Like you've rightly said, Banari started off as an in-house training institution for Kenya Ports Authority, and therefore they took their technical, port operations, staff there for training as well as other courses. But along the way, when the international maritime education and training, changed scenarios, then it became important for Kenya to have an institution where we could do the competency courses that I mentioned. And therefore Banari started doing, because we had to be white listed, we had to be accredited by the International Maritime Organization. But now with the needs and growth of the industry, it became very, very important, and of course with government's focus on the blue economy, to have an institution that can help churn out the technically trained, qualified young people who can then either work in local industries, but most important also work as export labor outside the country, because the world fleet will always be looking for young, supply, a pool of young people who can keep going to sea. And we thought with our youth bank, this is an ideal opportunity. IMO has specific minimum requirements for training in terms of the teachers, the cadre of personnel who are delivering the courses. In terms of, most important, the equipment that will enable the student to be able to simulate. In other words, we are supposed to be able to simulate life at sea when you are on land. It's called Shipping Campus Simulator. It's under construction now at Banari, because the people need to go on board. It actually simulates a vessel, and they'll be able to learn practically. We've also got into partnerships now with the industry, because what the IMO requires is that within the country you are able to simulate for the students and their learning. So we've already signed, or rather we're in the process of signing a partnership with Kenya Ferry Services because of the Mtongwe jetty, because Banari has got the boats now where the students will be able to do practical lessons, but they needed a jetty to launch, because they'll be learning how to board, how to launch the ship, and how to get off the ship using so that one is a work in progress. Then we've got exploring partnership with like St. John's Ambulance, because one of the basic requirements, one of the mandatory courses that a student has to do, and that is offered in Banari, is basic safety, some basic safety courses. How do you behave if a situation emerges when you're on board a ship and you're the seafarer, in terms of saving yourself, saving the cargo, saving the ship, preventing pollution if there is a fire on board. So we are also working with the firefighting outfits in KPA at the county government, so that the students get all this scenario. So it's using what we have nationally to be able to expose the students. And of course we are very grateful to have a facility like this one, where the students are also able to get hands-on experience.
And the other thing that comes into mind is, how then do you empower Banari Maritime Academy? We are talking about an institution that has been there for 40 years, with a capacity of 2 boats.
Yes.
But you're not training people to operate in boats. You want them to go into boats, to go into big ships, and so much. Are there plans to ensure that there is a training ship for students at Banari?
In the long run, in the future, that's one of the
And how long
pillars.
is the run?
But in the meantime, it doesn't mean that you can't train unless you have a ship for training. Because we've created the kind of partnerships that we need for the students to go on board. If you recall, before Corona pandemic, we had a very active program where we were doing recruitment. We've got arrangements with the Mediterranean Shipping Company, working through Kenya National Shipping Line, which is undergoing restructuring and revival. Now, what that did for us is give us a platform in which to market the Kenyan product, that Kenyans are able to deliver under pressure, Kenyans are able to travel well, Kenyans are able to communicate well, and they have the ethos to be able to work in the marine environment. Nobody knew that, and therefore the partnership with MSC gave us that platform in which to market and showcase the Kenyan youth.
And you're talking also about the training that is offered by Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology.
Yes.
And when you talk to industry stakeholders, they'll tell you that we do not have enough institutions that are churning out marine engineers in the desired numbers. How do we plan to deepen the training of marine engineers? Because when you look at all the port operations that are under in this country, you're talking about the port of Lamu, you're talking about the planned port at Shimoni, the expansion of Kenya Ports Authority, and all these will require significant number of personnel to operate them. So how do we plan to deepen, the training of qualified Kenyans to work in this industry?
You've made a very true observation that we don't have the numbers, or we don't have enough institutions that are training. For example, you've said that the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology is the only institution we have in this country right now that is training and focusing on marine engineering graduates. That's not enough. We need people who are doing nautical sciences, because they're the ones who, that's the course that produces navigators for this ship, the captains. We need people training trained in nautical studies, because they are the engineer designers for ships like this ones, in terms of building, in terms of repairs, in terms of redesigning, and of course in terms of disassembling. And what we are doing is we are having a very tight conversation with the universities, with the education sector, for them to be able to produce the kind of training courses that we need. But other than that, the TVET institutions, because some of the skills we need, maybe not at degree level, but also at the TVET institutions, and we are working with a few of them, working with my counterpart in charge of TVET, to be able to churn out the skilled personnel, because the beauty about the shipping industry, you don't have to enter at the top. And that's why we are also working and having a conversation with the Ministry of Education that under IMO regulations, you don't need a curriculum that is so long. Our curriculum is a bit long, and therefore we need people to enter at Form 4, do a shorter course, because it's hands-on. When you're in an institution like this one, when you're in a facility like this one, you are learning, and it should count towards your qualification. But that's more of what you need. So we are working on partnerships with the TVET institutions to be able to train the skills we need, who then can get the training in Banari Maritime Academy to be, we use the word marinated, to be able to get out into the sector.
And this is a topic, that has been there for quite a long time. Back in the 80s and 70s, Kenya had a bustling shipbuilding industry, that went down because of various reasons. And, as we speak now, the most prominent shipbuilder on the Kenyan coastline is ASECO, Southern Engineering Company. This is not definitely enough, with the high traffic of ships that are expected to be docking, within our waters. Once the completion of, the ports of Lamu, Shimoni, and so much, is done and dusted. How do we plan, to ensure that we bring more players into this industry? What I would call, incentivize, this industry for more players to come on board.
You've asked a very valid question, Mr. Kimani. Let me say that we are very fortunate that His Excellency the President is very focused on this sector. And one of the things that he is interested in is also reviving the shipbuilding industry in the inland waters, starting with Kisumu. And one of the tasks that we've been assigned is to come up with, and what we are doing now is to come up with the requirements or how to revive the shipbuilding industry in Kisumu, because it's also got huge potential for the inland waters. And one of the issues is, of course, the incentives we're talking about. We're having a conversation with Treasury, tax rebates, in terms of the materials, in terms of the work, and manufacturing. You remember the support to the manufacturing sector, and this falls right under that topic, particularly the incentives.
Agenda 4
under the Agenda 4, and also during the COVID season, the President's directive. And that's going to have to be an ongoing conversation. You will recall that under the Vision 2030, under the MTP3, which is the third cycle, of the implementation of that agenda, the maritime sector has been mainstreamed and now occupies pride of place as the 8th sector under the economic pillar of Vision 2030 that is expected to ensure continued 10% GDP growth, like you rightly said at the beginning, of this economy. And therefore, a lot of these initiatives that we are doing are driving towards the realization of that, goal.
And there is also, a specific drive by, the government to entrench a culture of buy Kenya, build Kenya.
Absolutely.
You cannot be preaching water and taking wine at the same time. We have seen in the past, the government, going overseas to buy, ferries and so much, from international companies. And, the stakeholders in these industries have always complained that, hey, look here, these are services we can provide. How then do we ensure that, even as a private sector, how can the government then, empower the private sector, in that clarion call of buy Kenya, build Kenya?
Now, yes, I forgot to mention that this is also one of the pillars that we are riding on as the maritime sector, to be able to produce what we can here. And I'm going to mention recently, because we are having these conversations in order to let the private sector know that this is possible. And recently, learning from other countries that have already done it, I'll cite the example of India. Recently, we held a 2-day web-based training with the Indian High Commission's assistance, where we brought the two countries in terms of the industry together, the shipbuilding sector in India and the shipbuilding sector in Kenya, plus other interested parties. And the conversation was to learn how India has benefited from locally manufactured ships. And India had a very interesting story, which we learned from. Following you remember the incident they had, the terror incident of Mumbai, the government concentrated on shipbuilding in order to raise the security.
It's very important, that you have brought on board, the issue of, employment and employability of people, Kenyans, trained for these ships. And one of the other challenges, that this industry is facing is lack of adherence to IMO standards in terms of wages and salaries, for people working, in this sector. And I know this has not been reviewed for close to 30 years now.
Okay.
As a government, do we plan to take this so that we can encourage more Kenyans, to go for these jobs?
Okay, let me tell you that it's not that we are planning to start. We've already started.
Oh, it has started.
It has started. Yes. And I'm going to say that we lost a bit of traction as a country when we failed initially to get on the white list, IMO white list, when due to safety standards, the maritime education and training protocols and procedures underwent a drastic change, which came out in 1995. And we lost some break, and a lot of the people, or a lot of Kenyan seafarers who are working on board foreign-going ships had to come back to shore. But we've been undergoing for the last, let me say, 10 years, very sustained, restructuring, reorganization of the industry. And the issue of salaries has not escaped our attention, because issues of seafarers' welfare have a tripartite arrangement, and that is the requirement under the International Labour Organization, because you want to prevent a lot of bad issues that can happen out at sea, like slavery, or people working on slave labor. And you find that a country like ours that is land-based industry looking, tends to forget that there are other people who work under different circumstances that therefore cannot be accommodated by the wage the wage regulations that we have on land.
Yeah.
But the structures that are in place, we've taken them on board. One of the most important ones under the Maritime Labour Convention, which Kenya has ratified, is to have a a Seafarer Wages Council. If you looked and noticed recently, the Ministry of Labour, because like I said, it's a tripartite, we have to work within government and the structures. The Ministry of Labour recently advertised for people to apply to be appointed to the Seafarers Wage Council.
Yeah.
And that's going to be up and running very soon.
It's going to deal with that.
But even then, even without that, and working with the regulator, we're working with social partners who then assist us to enforce decent wages. The International Transport Workers Federation, also known as the ITF, has been a very strong pillar of support for us in this area.
Fair.
And therefore, where we don't have national standards of wages, we are at liberty and we are allowed to use the ITF scale, and that's what we've been working with at the moment.
As we wind up, when you look at session of paper number 10 of 1965, on economic development and poverty, eradication in Kenya, it had a very elaborate, plan on how Kenya was going to tap, the maritime industry, to create jobs, especially around the coastal region, and also enhance economic development, and so. It is often said that if you do not learn from history, you're bound to repeat it.
Absolutely.
What lessons have we learned, along this journey that we have to avoid, and what new lessons that we have learned that we are going to employ going into the future, even as we enhance our interaction with this critical sector?
Yes, you've rightly said, Mr. Kimani, that we have a very rich history of the maritime sector. If you recall, Kenya was part owner of a very robust and thriving shipping line then, known as the East African Shipping Line. And we even had vessels, MV Jogo. When you talk to those old seafarers, they'll tell you how it used to be such a moment of pride for them to get to sail into a port like Liverpool and see the MV Jogo, our own Kenyan, flying our flag, and where they could go and get, home goodies. Our own first president of this country, his first travel overseas, he was
using a Kenyan
ship. And I want to say that we've learned very serious lessons on that. Never to lose sight and never to take our eye on the ball of the maritime sector. And the institutional framework and the legal frameworks that we've put, I'm very sure, guarantee that we will never forget that. Having an institution that is really focused on the maritime sector, Kenya Maritime Authority, because initially one of the mistakes we made is that things maritime were put in KPA, which is a service provider, and therefore regulation did not take the priority that it has. So having institutions that are focused on the development and the growth of the maritime sector ensures that we don't do that. Within government itself, I think the biggest statement has been having a state department that is dedicated to waking up every morning looking at the maritime sector, the State Department for Shipping and Maritime. And that in that organization of government, having an opportunity then to interact with other sister state corporations and infusing blue economy mindset has been very, very useful, I must say. It's a continuing journey, because what is now coming out is that the journey towards the blue economy is not a one department affair. It's infusing blue growth.
It is multi-sectoral.
It's so multi-sectoral that we must work together with many departments to be able to deliver. For example, look at the lessons that we are learning from the corona pandemic. Ministry of Health is a big player in the sector, in terms of ensuring that we don't have infection, cross-infection. And going into the future, into the new normal, this is guaranteed, to continue in terms of deepening. For example, one of the things that we are doing now at Banari Maritime, now that I remember you and you had asked, health is a very big part of job, the labor market at sea. Because before, young people board, under the World Health Organization, there are minimum inoculations that they must do. And it was reaching a stage where it used to be a big challenge for when we were sending the crew out to get some of the vaccines, because they are not available, because they stopped being imported into the country. And therefore, one of the things we are doing is having our own health center within the Banari Maritime Academy that is going to look after those requirements for the seafarers, that they can come and renew their vaccination certificates and walk out to sea, and before they go back to sea. And therefore, part of my job is to work with my sister and brother PSs to be able to bring that awareness of what we can do together with them to be able to ensure the industry never sticks. The other thing, the latest thing we've been able to achieve is working with higher education loans board to set up the framework in which to get a maritime training revolving fund. This is fresh off the shelf. We just did it a week ago.
Yeah.
Which means that students who want to study in maritime field will have now guaranteed loans, and you can't do better than that.
Very good.
Yeah.
It's quite wide. We cannot exhaust it on this platform alone.
Yes.
But as I always say, these are discussions that we'll continue engaging on.
Thank you.
As we seek to develop and exploit this critical industry.
Thank you very much.
Those are quite grand plans.
Okay.
And as you say, grand plans requires grand actions.
Absolutely.
All the best.
Eyes on the ball.
Thank
you very much for the opportunity to speak to Kenyans.
Asante sana. We've been talking to the peers in charge of shipping and maritime affairs, Nancy Karigithu. Our discussion revolved around developing the maritime industry here in Kenya, for now and for the future. My name is O'Brien. Thank you for your time. All the best.